So I get super nervous and stuff like this, but I actually really like to talk. And I can, like anybody who comes to visit me at Ujima Collective in the Hill District, whatever the specific meeting might be on, there's no such thing really as a short meeting. So we might actually be there for 45 minutes, even if it's something like you just came to ask a question. That could be a bad thing, but it also could be a good thing, because there's a lot of things I think that oftentimes get illuminated in our conversations. But again, I'm LaKeisha. Several years ago, I found out, well, I actually had a lot of friends when I was going through a lot of my growth and development as a younger person out of college, and I had a lot of friends who were changing their names. And because they felt like the name, right, and these are black friends who felt like the names that their parents gave them didn't fit them, and they wanted something maybe that was more cultural or whatnot. And so I had said to myself, maybe I need to change my name. And then I went through this whole cycle of researching and doing all of this stuff, and then I found out actually that my name, actually in Swahili, a version of my name means the favorite one. And I really struggled with that for a super long time, because I struggle with, and kind of what in Nathan talked about, I think that there's sometimes a part of all of us that want the limelight, that want to be a star, but then there's a huge part of us, and at least for me, a huge part of me, that seeks to be like under the covers, totally under the radar, and not being that. So I really struggled with the meaning of my name, but now I've come to kind of embrace that and really make sense of it. So I'm not good on math at all.
That's cool. I think it's fine.
Okay, cool. Revolution. So I'm going to just start. I have like lots and lots of papers and note cards, which I probably won't use, but because I like to talk a lot, I describe it as I'm going to try to stay on the river, but when you're on the river, you know there's lots of streams and pathways where the water flows. So as we're on the boat going down the river, I'm going to just try to talk about the streams, but not really go too far down each tributary, because it could take us into, it might be really good journeying, but it might not keep us on the path. But I want to just start kind of with a quote by Socrates. I'm not really a big follower of it, but a while ago I was in a talk with somebody else, and they had quoted Socrates, and this is like Socrates number 38, where he says that the unexamined life is not worth living. And that really stuck with me, because I really feel like a lot of the work that needs to be done is here, right? There's so much change that we need to do in the world, right? People are dying, people are suffering every day, and people are really dying over and over and over again in life, right? People are just reliving traumas, and inside of themselves are dying. And I say that from my own personal walk, because I know what it's like to relive trauma over and over and over again. And so the revolution, you know, really starts within. And so I'm going to talk about that mostly. And of course, you know, when people, especially in the community, I think my community has really expanded over the last couple of years, but the community that I belong to and that people claim me in mostly would be the quote-unquote conscious Black community. And those are the folks who are working and striving to change some of the most oppressive conditions, right, that are facing people. And in that community, getting a little dry mouth here. When we think about revolution, because we face so much violence, oftentimes we think about that as a physical fight, like a physical fighting back, right? And that is real. That's a reality. You know, you can only take so much getting beat down before you put your fist up and fight back, right? Because there's something, right, called survival. You have your fight or your flight response, and so you're going to do one or the other. It's nature. But a lot of the work, again, that is necessary is the internal work. And so I think about words a lot. When I went to school, I went to Penn State, and I studied communications, specifically broadcast journalism. And but words really intrigue me. Sometimes I think about them deeply, and sometimes I'm just like, I don't want to really think about it. But the word revolution, when I think about it, of course, I think about the root of the words, and I oftentimes break it down. And so the word when you put it on almost any word, means to go back and to do something again, right? And so it is a cycle. And then, of course, evolution, right, is this constant changing. It's this unfolding, this unrolling, which also within it has this sort of cycling action too. And so I think about that a lot. And so I'm really inspired by nature. And so for me, when I think about cycling, and we can think about recycling, doing these things over and over and over again, sometimes, depending on what you're doing, you might get the same result. And sometimes what you're doing, you might get a different result. But in going back to examine yourself, you have to understand where you came from. And so thus, the roots, I thought this was a really cool image of the tree and the roots. There's the saying, if you don't know where you came from, you don't know where you're going. And for me, that's super true. And I mean, I think for everybody, whether you believe it or not, it's actually super true. Hold on there. I was playing with these slides over and over and over again, so I just want to not, where my slide is. Okay, that's slide 3. So before I get to slide 3. The other part of revolution to talk about, word-wise, right? When you look it up in the dictionary, you get lots of things. But one of the things, of course, is radical change. And again, when people talk about being radical, that scares a lot of people, right? Because radical is like bucking against the system. Radical, I believe that it invokes fear to anybody who is a system-loving, system-benefiting person. When you come up against somebody who says that they're radical or gives the appearance or perception of that, it's quite scary. And so innately, because you want to protect the things that benefit you, there's a lot of like hell no going on, right? But radical, the word, means to go to the root. And so again, it's about going back to the beginning, going back to the truth. And And so there's so much there. Now, I'm a lot of things. But I'm so inspired by nature. So even though I went to school for broadcast journalism, I decided not to study that field. Like, I was actually really, really good at it. When I graduated, so I'm from Pittsburgh, and when I left high school, I was doing a lot of journalism stuff in school, and I was really inspired. And when I left, I said, "Hey, Kim, I just noticed that you were there. Hey, Kim." I said, I want to change the way that black people are viewed on the nightly news. And at the time, Darieth Chisholm, right, who is now an entrepreneur and doing her thing, she was like up and coming. She was a role model for me. And so I said, wow, I want to be like Darieth Chisholm. And so I wanted to change the way black people were viewed on the nightly news. I didn't necessarily know what I needed to do that. But what I did know was that there never was enough time to tell the stories. I felt like there never was time to go to the root, right? So you would see, oh, there was this crime, and they'd plaster these black faces, but we would never really understand what really happened, right? And so I always felt like there were these stories that never got told, and that we'd keep recycling the same lines, the same stories that weren't necessarily true, right? That we would continue to believe things that didn't really unveil the light to be shown on what was actually going on. And for a lot of people, it's comfortable. And it is truly comfortable to stay in that place, even though it's a very uncomfortable reality. There are benefits for some people to do that, right? And so now in my life, when I left Penn State, I left Penn State under a lot of duress. I was getting racist death threats at Penn State. Heads came up, yes, Brian Brown. I was getting racist death threats at Penn State. And it's interesting because when you Google my name, right, today, you might get maybe 4 posts about maybe some current business stuff, right? You might get my website or whatever. But maybe 4 or 5 things down on that first page is going to say, death threats changed LaKeisha's life. And it's a very true headline, because death threats totally changed my life, definitely. But when I left Penn State, it was under duress. I had been getting these death threats because I was at school speaking the truth. I didn't necessarily feel like I was this radical, per se. I felt like I needed to stand up and speak about this reality and these lies that people live and these stories that people tell, right? And so it's very easy for most people, if somebody is sending you death threats, right? No matter your race, your background, or whatever, it's very easy for everybody to say, that is so wrong, that's horrible, that person should go to jail, blah, 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 right? And everybody thinks it's bad. But when we talk about what kind of thinking, right, when we go to the root, what kind of thinking and what kind of system and what kind of education in this country gives people the platform to take it there, right? Because there's something that gives people the platform to take it there. And when we put light on that, everybody doesn't agree. And that's kind of where the problem is. And that's where my problem was. And if you're on the side that doesn't benefit, that's what the problem is. And then when you talk about it, you become the problem, The problem is not the problem. You become the problem. And so for me and for the other students that I was with, when it was clear that multiple black student leaders and football players were getting death threats and were being harassed, right? And we began to question what type of cultural environment, what kind of system lets this happen over and over and over again. Like, how do we create this, right? Because everybody wants to put their hands up and say, oh, like, I have nothing to do with this isn't me, this is some other people, right? But somewhere in there, we all have to take responsibility. And so we were the students to say, hey, wait a minute. So I with some other folks, we were members of the Black Caucus. I was the Black Caucus president, which is like the Black Student Union. We did this survey, and we surveyed about 350 students of all backgrounds to talk about what have your, what stories can you tell us, right? So there was like some multiple choice, and then there was open essay. What stories and experiences have you personally had or have you witnessed on this campus, in this community, and in the classroom that you can tell us about? And everybody, white, black, Asian, Latino, everybody had a story. And a lot of the stories were really scary, actually, to be in a classroom and having professors say things that were like utterly beyond distasteful about, you know, African people, you know, all kinds of things. And so what we said was, hey, well, wait a minute. If this is happening in the classroom and we're at Pennsylvania's land grants institution, whose role is to prepare the constituents of the state to go back and deal with the problems of the state, and to be, you know, prepared to do that. Why aren't we preparing people in the classroom to deal with some of these things, and not just necessarily the attitudes that make people write death threats, but what we started looking at was, what are the issues and the challenges that are impacting black and brown people in the state? And we found, right, black folks were on the lowest rungs of the ladder when it came to incarceration, education, poverty, right? The list goes on and on and on. And we said, well, how can, right, and some of these things, right, impact lots of people beyond race, right? But if we're not really preparing people to deal with that and to have the correct sort of mind frame to even approach people to deal with that, what are we doing, right? Because isn't this what school is? Because if not here, where are we supposed to do this at, right? Because this is, you know, people go to school because they want to do whatever they feel passionate, you know, on. But most of us say, regardless of what you say your purpose is, most of us say that our purpose is to help somebody, right? Like, we want to help somebody, we want to make the world better or whatever. But in order to do that, we have to really understand where we're coming from, because what you share is all that you are. So when you share, you just don't share the good stuff. You sometimes share the other stuff that you may or may not be even aware that's actually there. And so we started to look at what students were learning in the actual classroom, right? And got deeply into that work. And I'm talking about, like, we were doing research and work that folks get paid six figures to do and weren't doing anything about at all. So Penn State had this framework to foster diversity. And this was this beautifully written document that had that actually was created because there were federal and state laws and like mandates that Penn State do this work. And then we found out that Penn State wasn't doing this work and that there was no system of, there was just no system to put it into action, that it was this document, they made it beautiful, and then they set it on the shelf. But while they set it on the shelf, people are actually suffering, and people are dying, and nobody is being prepared truly to deal with this in this way. So that's a nutshell. That I actually went down the stream a little bit on that one, off the riverbank. But just to come back, so I did all of this work at Penn State, and it truly changed the way in which I thought about education. And when I looked at the word education and got to the root of that word, right, there's a difference between that and training. So you can train somebody, right, like a robot to do lots of things. And most of the schools are training us, right? Most of our schools, most of us go to training. And I'm not saying training is bad. I'm just saying that there's a difference. Education, on the other hand, the root of the word is to educe, right? Educere, which is Latin, I think. And that's to bring out what is already there, right? And I believe in nature, right? To me, it's what we are. It's who we are. There's no getting away from it. And so if we're really educing people, we're truly bringing out the best that is within them. And when we're doing that, we're also able to shine light on the things that might need to be changed or altered or dealt with in whatever kind of way, right? The things that need to be looked at. Because I decided not to do broadcast journalism, I was just working in the community. But Penn State gave me a lot of trauma. I mean, I literally was traumatized. You don't know where these death threats are coming from. You recognize that when somebody puts your picture in the newspaper, right? And even though you know that you're doing this really, really, really good work, the perception when people look at the paper and you get this little snapshot maybe of what I'm doing, but you don't get the full story because there's never enough time to do any of that. We recycle these same dramas and stories. And so I got a lot of other stares and looks from that work as well. But for me, I needed to really heal from that. And so for me, when I also think about revolution, self-love is so revolutionary, right? And it's the work that we all really need to do, again, whether you know it or not. And so I try to liken it, again, to nature. And I think about, so that's why I have this wonderful image here, right? Oftentimes you might hear people say, and I say this often, we might say, oh, this is my season for blah, blah, blah. This is my season for writing, or I'm in my season for this, I'm in my season for that, right? And those, of course, are not just sayings, right? Those things are based on nature. It's based on the fact that there are actual seasons for doing different kinds of work, and doing them at different times in the season gives you the natural sort of like energy flow to make certain things happen. And so I just wanted to give light to this image about the seasons, but also to say when you think about the work that you have to do, whatever that work is, that you kind of have to think about yourself as the earth, right? And so when we think about revolution in this cycle, right? So in science, we talk about the Earth making a full revolution around the sun, which is 365 and 1/4 days, right? That's our year. But the Earth has its own cycle, right? The Earth is on its own axis, tilted, and is cycling too, right? Which gives us our days and our nights. And if you think about yourself as the Earth, there's some days and nights that we constantly have to be going through. However, America oftentimes has you so distracted, you're not really going through your days and nights. You're not really doing your work here, right? You're so distracted by, the Real Housewives or the football game or whatever. And it's interesting because, again, with words, right? I studied Spanish in school. And I think the word for sports is diversión. Is that true? Right? And when I thought about that, I was like, that means diversion. Okay, but something tells me that, and it's okay to have a diversion every once in a while, but there's important work to be done, to be done. But, so you're the Earth doing your cycle, and then the sun is your community. It's the rest of the world, right? So when you're doing this here, and then you're doing this here, right, and you're doing it at the same time, that's when everything can become peaceful, right? We can achieve our justice when we're doing our work. Sankofa. Sankofa, these are Adinkra symbols from West Africa. I have the heart-shaped one on my back, but these both are actually the same symbol. And I was blessed after my first year at Penn State, before I got into the thick of the drama there, I came home and got a summer job, and I was blessed to meet a lot of elders and teachers and mentors who taught me a lot of things, and they really helped to open me up. But Sankofa literally means to go back and fetch it, meaning that it is not taboo to go back and to get the things that you have forgotten. And the symbol means everything to me, really. So it's this bird that is flying forward. It's looking back into the past, and in its mouth it holds this egg. And the egg is the wisdom, right? That we're taking the best of our past to bring it forward into the present so that we can build for the future. And for me, when I think about that and think about, healing and being present to do the work that is necessary in this lifetime, I feel like I have to have a foot in the past and I have to have a foot in the future, right? And so that means that I have to recognize who I am in terms of who my ancestors are, right? And some of their great things, because you are who you are, right? So we might hate our parents or whatever traumas that have happened in our families, right? But you literally are the blood, the bones, and the cells of those same people. And to recognize that, sometimes you actually carry some of that same stuff forward. And there's work that so has to be done here so that, as Native people say, so that when we think about 7 generations forward, right, when we're thinking about the future, that the actions that we take today are looking at how those are going to impact all of those unborn, right? So Sankofa is a really, 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 really important concept. And I like the one that is the heart, because the heart is what we need to deal with the work. I'm going to try to go through some of these images quickly. Trauma, so this is a picture of me at Penn State. I actually had on a bulletproof vest. There's a whole lot going on. So you could Google it, but you're not going to get the whole story. I would love to have a time to talk about that story. But I had gotten lots of threats. And there was a mass movement to threaten black people at Penn State. But one of the last letters that I got, the person talked about actually murdering a black man, and a body was found, right? These are things that we don't talk about, right? Because the mainstream is not going to tell you the truth. But I chose this picture because, you know, I've had many, many, many experiences in my life that have taken my breath away. And I felt like this picture shows a moment when my breath was taken away. And when we have our breath taken away, right, because your breath is a cycle. It is a complete circle through your body that feeds your heart, right? It's the same circle outside of yourself, right, between you and the plants and the trees. There is a relationship there. But when trauma takes your breath away, when fear takes your breath away, right, it creates blockages in your body. And we're talking about, again, when we think about the past and we think about the traumas of our ancestors, right, no matter who you are, there are things that we have carried forward that have to be moved, that have to be unstuck, so that we can have the true kind of revolution that we need, which is not a finite thing. It's an ongoing cycle, right? We have to be re-evolving all the time. But when your breath gets taken from you, you literally create blockages in your body, right? And so, you know, whether you believe it or not, right? People talk about the chakras. In a class that I'm taking with Kim and other folks, we're learning how to heal ourselves so that we can help to heal other people, right? And if you ask me what my purpose is, I believe that my purpose is to be a healer. The first person I have to heal is myself, and it's an ongoing thing, and traumas are constant. You can walk outside and see something crazy, and it will take your breath away. And so you have to have processes and rituals, whatever that looks like for you personally, that helps you catch your breath, right? But in our class, we recognized with our teacher that the chakras also follow the notes on the piano, right? So it's do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. And it's beautiful because I was like, wow, and they say that music is the universal language. But it's so true, again, when you go back to nature and look at the way that our bodies were designed naturally. So I'm trying to drop some jewels because Nathan has given me my sign here. You guys know who that is. Joe Paterno. So this is me and Joe Paterno in a meeting with Joe Paterno. Again, right, I was tired and I was frustrated. And this was a moment that also, not surprising, but kind of took my breath away. And I bring this up just to say that, you know, we're living in a system that has people stuck. And it's sad that when Joe Paterno, right, when he was forced to resign from Penn State amid the confusion, right, about what happened with these children being molested, right, with the folks around the football team, or leading the football team. Come to find out when those stories came out, that in my drama were actually happening at the very same time. So the football team was actually going through a lot because there were folks getting death threats on that football team, and Joe Paterno and other people weren't talking about that either because the football is what makes the money. And when I got the death threat that said that they had murdered somebody, it was the evening of the blue and white scrimmage football game that brings the huge, like, base of folks from, they say that Penn State has the biggest, like, alumni base in the world. You can go anywhere and find somebody who went to Penn State. I don't know. But, so that's a huge thing. So you have all these people who are coming on campus in. But Joe Paterno and other folks were unwilling to talk about the fact that there was an admitted murderer on the loose because it was football time. It was time for this blue and white football game. But my life, right, I had gotten several threats up to that moment. And it was like, wow, they don't care that somebody wants to, like, literally kill me, told me that they killed somebody else and where they could find the body. But this is so much more important, right? And so for me, I had to, again, go back on my axis and think about what kind of work I needed to do here so that I could go out here and do some work. But this picture, oh my God, Joe Paterno. A couple of other images. This top one and the bottom one. When we began to look at what we were learning in the classroom, and we went to the faculty senate who's in charge of curriculum, right? These are the people who make decisions about what gets taught in the classroom, to this hugest population of people who go to Penn State, right? Who become our teachers, who become the directors of all kinds of programs, who make the decisions about who gets funding and who doesn't, who gets food stamps and who doesn't, who gets good schools and who doesn't, right? These decisions are made by people like you and me who go to Penn State, right? But if we're not really dealing with some of the stuff that we need to deal with, there's a problem. And so we said, well, let's actually talk about what we're learning and what the actual curriculum consists of. And what was interesting is, of course, we were met with all kinds of bureaucracy. But the leader of the faculty senate, the president and the vice president sat down with us because we had to demonstrate to them, right, by doing all of our research, that they had failed to meet these state laws and mandates to do this work. And the leader of the faculty senate literally said to us in this meeting, I have a steep learning curve when it comes to you. Can you give me a book list? Right, and he's talking about black people. Can you give me a book list to read because I don't really know what you're talking about? And I was like, damn, like, this is really deep. But it's really, really, really deep. Because the reality is that you don't have to, right? You don't have to know anything about me. You don't have to know anything about the conditions that I deal with, even though I did not create them, right? And you might say that you did not create them. But somehow we're participating in this thing, and something's got to give. Something's got to give here. But we recognize that our leaders were not prepared. And it was the young people, right? Because it's always the young people who are the leaders of the revolution oftentimes when we see it outside of ourselves, because they're the ones who oftentimes have nothing to lose because they're not yet so ingrained in the system where they feel like they're going to lose a paycheck or they feel like, you know, there's this risk that they're ready to give it all. And I think that, you know, I was there. I was like 20, 21 years old. But when you recognize that the people that you entrust to protect you and to serve your best interests know nothing about you and actually could actually care less to know and aren't willing to do the work to get there, right? To do their own cycle, to get there, even though this is their job and I'm paying you to do that, right? There's a problem with that. Huge, huge problem. And so we were able to make some changes at Penn State. But the most important thing for me was my healing. And I mentioned that I had a lot of awesome teachers and mentors and elders. And so libation is one of the things that my teachers taught me. And it is a way to really acknowledge, one, that life is a cycle and life is a constant revolution, that there is no beginning and there is no end, that you have the past and you have the present, and you constantly have to be circling through both of those things to be here now. Sister Sarah Jamila up here at the top, she's well into her 70s. She is one of the people who has kept the history of the Underground Railroad in Pittsburgh. And she has deemed me the keeper of the staff. And so every year we take people, mostly black people, on this reenactment, right? There's our R-E word, on this reenactment of this Underground Railroad. And we go to the places and we talk about what it was like to run to freedom at nighttime, right? And so it's interesting because we go into the woods and I think about, these are the same trees. Some of these might be actually the same trees. This is the same soil that my ancestors walked on, right? And so that's the work that I do in order to do this work, because this is so necessary. And I'm getting emotional because it's really life and death. For some people, it's like whatever. For me, it's life and death, right? Like Harriet Tubman, right? She said she could have freed more people if they knew that they were slaves, right? And there's people she would go to try to get them off of the plantation, right? And now we can compare the plantation to any system. And it doesn't matter if you're black, white, brown, yellow, whatever, any system that has you stuck, right? But you have to recognize when you're stuck, because we get comfortable in really uncomfortable places. And we will literally die over and over and over again in this life and not truly live and not live our purpose, right? And not really walk our walk, not really truly inspire people because we're afraid, right? Because to get from here to here, right, to make the beautiful gemstones and crystals, the earth has to go through some pressure and some heat. And we get afraid to go through the pressure and the heat, right? White folks cringe sometimes when we talk about race. And we don't want to be in that. We don't want to be in that, right? But let me tell you this, and I can just speak from my personal experience, right? This is my testimony. I knew that white supremacy, racism was real when I knew that I was doing it to myself, right? I knew that it was a disease that impacts so many people when I recognized that I had it. So this is the healing work, right? Because when you see the TV screen and you see the violence in the black community or wherever, there's some trauma. There's some pain there, right? And so we can say, yeah, lock those people up. And sometimes some people might need to be locked up because they might be just dangerous in the moment. But there's some serious healing that needs to be going on. So the work that I do now, I started making jewelry after Penn State just as a way to heal myself, right? Beading became like meditation for me. And I would do that work with other women. We would sit in circles. So it wasn't even about a business. After I said I wasn't going to do broadcast journalism because I realized that I was about to be all up in that system, and I didn't want to be all up in that system, being that same person with that 2-second, 30-second shot to tell that story. Couldn't do it. And so I went back and I was working with young people in South Oakland in the Hill District. But my business grew out of my need to heal. And I called it Enjoy Yourself, because I actually found an Adinkra symbol that meant to enjoy yourself. And it was shaped like a house, right? And when you think about, there's that saying, your body is your temple, right? In our class, in our herbal medicine class, our teacher said, here's some ancestral wisdom. She said that every disease, right, every sickness is actually homesickness, right? And when you think about your temple and your body as your home, it's homesickness, because oftentimes we're not living who we truly are supposed to be. And we don't recognize that the house that we call home here has been invaded, right, by all kinds of things. And I truly believe that the things that we physically manifest as illness, right, come from external stuff, right? I feel like a part of my purpose as a healer in spirit and science is to be able to speak multiple languages of spirit and science, right? That a lot of the things that we try to describe, right, we need sometimes multiple ways of talking about it so that everybody gets it, right? So I could talk to you about vibration and atoms, right, when I talk to people about my jewelry, because when I start saying certain things, people get scared, because if I'm not saying Jesus and Christianity, it's like, oh, right? So then I have to say, okay, well, you can wear it because it's pretty, but I can give you a little bit of science stuff with that, right? But there are vibrations from the earth that are going to help us heal, and we need to tap in and tune into that. And, I make skincare and hair care products and things that are made with herbs and plants from the earth, because it's what we need, because it's who we are and it's what we're made out of. This is my very last slide, Nathan. Ultimately, the revolution, right, is supposed to get us here to Ma'at. And Ma'at is the Egyptian or Kemetic deity that represents the balance and the fairness. She holds the scales, right? And so they say when you die, right, in Christianity they talk about, God and Judgment Day, right? Before Christianity, there was Kemetic science and spirituality, right? And there's the same stories you can find, but with different names. But Ma'at is going to weigh your soul against a feather and to see how light you are, right? And when you're turning and doing your work, you can let that stuff go. If you're not turning and doing your work, you might be a little on the heavy side at the end of the day. But that ultimately is where we're trying to go, right? To the balance, to the fairness, to the equity, right? And I love synonyms. We need to use more synonyms, because I think sometimes we get stuck. But justice, justice is revolution, and justice I think we all need for whatever your personal stuff is. and then whatever our collective stuff is, right? And we can talk about a long list of collective stuff. But that's the revolution, y'all. And that's it. Peace.